Let's turn today to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13. We were considering in our last study the man who sowed the good seed, the parable that Jesus spoke, in the field where the seed was not God's word, but the children of the kingdom, as this is Matthew 13:24. He first spoke about God's word as the seed, and then he spoke about the children of God as the seed. That's very interesting, that Jesus spoke two parables. Many people are familiar with the first one, but not the second one. But when you see how Jesus spoke one after the other, we see that the children of the kingdom are also called the seed, and God's word is called the seed. What is the significance of this? God's word is the written word which is sown into our hearts. When we obey that and it becomes a part of our life, we can say, in a sense, that word has been reproduced in our life, and we ourselves become the seed as well. God seeds the world with his kingdom, with the sons of his kingdom, and they are the ones who have allowed that seed of God's word, which is spoken in the first parable, to become their life through obedience. These are the wheat. The others are the tares, who speak the right language, say the right words, but God's word has not become life. The word has not become flesh in them. It is just a written commandment. We are to be among those in whom the word has become life. Then Jesus spoke another parable, again about seed. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And this is smaller than all other seeds. But when it is full grown, it is larger than the garden plants, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches." This and the remaining parables are not explained by Jesus, and therefore it becomes a little more difficult for us to be dogmatic about its interpretation. Particularly, these two parables, this one about the mustard seed and the next one about leaven. When we understand that Jesus was speaking about the kingdom of heaven as it appeared on the earth, he said the kingdom of heaven is like a sower going out to sow. He said the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, and an enemy came and sowed tares. So, in that outward expression of the kingdom of heaven, we find wheat and tares. So he's speaking about what people see to be the church here on earth. He's not talking about the pure church as it will be in heaven, because in that church there are no tares. In that church, there's no one with bad ground who has only a superficial life, or in whom the thorns choke the seed. So we must bear this in mind. Even the remaining parables, he speaks about the kingdom of heaven having like a dragnet. That's a very clear example in Matthew 13:47. The kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. And if the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet, who all are the ones inside this dragnet? Good fish and bad fish, we read in verse 48. Are there bad fish in the kingdom of heaven? In the outward expression of that kingdom, in what is commonly known as the church, and in Christendom on earth, there is both. So once we understand that in all these parables, Jesus is not speaking about the kingdom of heaven as it will be in its purity in the final day, but rather as he's speaking about the kingdom of heaven as it is seen now on earth by others. It looks like a dragnet having good and bad fish. But it will only be at the end of the age, we read in Matthew 13:49, that the wicked will be separated. Until then, this kingdom of heaven dragnet contains both. And that is the unfortunate thing. But God has allowed it. God has allowed hypocrites to be in the church, so that many purposes are fulfilled. We don't have time to go into all of that now. But when we understand that he's referring to this outward expression of God's kingdom, we understand this parable a little better. The mustard plant is certainly not the largest of all the plants on earth. Under no category can we call it the largest of plants. But yet we read here about this mustard seed in Matthew 13:31 and 32, which when it is full grown becomes larger than all the plants and becomes a tree, so big that the birds of the air can come and make its nest in the branches of this mustard seed tree. That is quite amazing. Yeah, that speaks of a huge tree, which is not what a mustard tree really becomes. So we can say that this is referring to an unnatural growth which God never intended. God intended a mustard tree to be a certain size. That's the way God made it in nature. But here it is speaking about something that has grown far, far bigger than God ever intended it to be. And that refers to Christendom in its outward expression because of a compromising message, gathering together a mixed multitude, because the narrow gate was not proclaimed, the needle's eye was not held up to every person who wanted to become a Christian. A whole lot of people were allowed to come in who had no interest in discipleship. Remember the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and said, Jesus said, "You can't follow me unless you give up your love for money." That's essentially what Jesus said. But you hardly hear that type of preaching today. That needle's eye is not held up. The result is a whole lot of rich young rulers and many other people come into what's called the church today. And the result is the church, instead of being small and powerful, has become fat and flabby and large in size and lost all its power. It's become the largest of the plants. People say that Christianity is the largest religion in the world today. What's the use of that if it's lost its power? 10 people who are wholehearted could accomplish more for God on earth than all this great multitude. The early apostles, they were not large in number, but they were pure and therefore powerful. No, the mustard seed was meant by God to grow up to be a small mustard tree. But man is never satisfied with something small. He wants something big, something that will impress. He wants to build a large denomination that will impress. And what is the result when we build a huge thing and call it the church? We read here the birds of the air. We read earlier about the birds of the air in the previous parable, in an earlier parable where Jesus said the birds of the air were the agents of Satan. And it says the agents of Satan come and sit down in the branches of this so-called church. And that's exactly what we see in Christendom today, where people have tried to make it something big and impressive before men. The agents of Satan have come in and sit as board members and elders and deacons. And then, of course, they rule the show. But that was never the way God intended it. And Jesus was prophesying as to what was going to happen. And there's something that we can profitably ask ourselves. Which would you prefer? To be in a church that's small and powerful, or a church that's large and compromising? There is security in numbers as far as the world is concerned. And worldly-minded Christian thinks that we can impress the nation when we increase in numbers. No, it's not by numbers, it's by purity. God commits himself not to a church that's large in number, but that has purity. Jesus never said, "By this all men will know you're my disciples," when you increase in number and become a great multitude. No, he was not bothered about numbers. In fact, in the ministry of Jesus, he was always seeking to reduce the multitude. Whenever great multitudes followed him, he turned around and said some of the hardest things he ever said to them, with the whole purpose of reducing that great multitude to a small number. It's very rare to see that type of ministry today that's seeking to reduce the great multitude to a small number that's pure. But that's what God's looking for everywhere. A ministry that will purify the church and bring it back to God's original purpose. It can be small, but it will be a genuine mustard tree that produces mustard seed. Jesus spoke about in another place to his disciples about having faith like a mustard seed. That was enough. There was no need of a great amount of faith. He said in Luke chapter 17, verse 6, if you had faith like a mustard seed, you can get a tree uprooted, you can get a mountain uprooted. It's faith, genuine faith, that Jesus likened to a mustard seed. It doesn't have to be big. It has to be genuine. That's the point. They said, Lord, increase our faith. And the Lord said, you don't need to increase it. You need to get the right quality. Let's remember that. It's quality that God looks for and not size.